As we know, the price of food can really depend on where you live, and I'm not just talking about Australia compared with other countries. The cost of your shopping trolley can change from suburb to suburb. So why are we paying more for food than ever before, and where do we stand against the rest of the world? To talk about this morning, I'm joined by the CEO of the Australian Retailers Association, Margie Osmond, consumer advocate Craig Kelly, and competition expert Frank Zumbo, who joined us last week. G'day, Frank. Listen, you know, as I mentioned, in the last 40%, Australia pays 40% on average for food compared to the rest of the world, all the other OECD countries. As head of the national retailers, you look after and override, Myers, DJs, Coles, Woolies. Why is this so?
Well, I think it's important to get the figures right in the first instance. What we're actually talking about here are OECD figures over a 10-year period. The OECD themselves recommend that you shouldn't be using the figures over that period. You should only use them from 2005 onwards. But put that aside for one moment. And this is not my opinion. This is people like Craig James from ComSec and Terry McCrann from The Age. If you actually look at the inflation figures for food and stack them up against wages growth, in actual fact, we're ahead, because wages growth has been something like 51%, and we're the second of developed countries in the world in terms of that wages growth. So people are getting better value for their money now than they were previously.
What's your view on this, Frank? Because last week we discussed this in detail, and you've done your homework. What's your view?
Well, look, I think Margie's being selective in her numbers. I mean, to look at a 10-year period is more useful on the basis that from time to time you do have isolated events.
Not according to the OECD,
so
and they say so on their website.
A 10-year period gives you a better view of what's happening, and over that time, consistently, we have the highest levels of food inflation.
And the highest levels of wages growth at the same time.
No, that's not correct. The reality is that she's looking at earnings, not labour costs. Labour costs have been consistently lower in Australia. In Australia, we've got the highest levels of food inflation because of the high levels of concentration.
No, the issue here is if you have wages growth that is as high as ours has been, that's going to drive inflation, and it's going to affect everything, not just food.
Well, Margie, food is higher because of the domination of Coles and Woolworths. And that's the difference. No, that's the difference compared to the rest of the world.
Rubbish.
Okay,
you need to face up to it, Margie.
Frank, Margie, back in your corners. Craig, explain the experiment as a consumer advocate you went through and what the result was.
Well, we saw there was a very big gap in the OECD figures between Australia and New Zealand. Australian supermarket prices and food prices were increasing much faster than New Zealand. So we did a comparison. We picked 70 items, everyday items available in Australian supermarkets that are also available in New Zealand supermarkets.
You actually did this. You got a shopping trolley, you picked 70 average items, off you went to New Zealand, somewhere outside, half an hour outside of Auckland, and you did the same in Australia. What was cheaper? What was more expensive?
We found the prices in New Zealand were actually 30 to 40% cheaper than what they were in Australia. And we are talking the same items. We're talking Vegemite. We're talking Bergen bread. We're talking Flora margarine. We're talking Coca-Cola. Items that are everyday Australian consumers buy, we're simply paying 20 to 30%
And we're looking
higher
at these prices on the screen. OK, from your view, Craig, why is this so?
Well, simply we have the most concentrated retail sector in the world. Nowhere else do just two chains have the dominance that Woolworths and Coles do in Australia.
On that note, Margie, your view.
And we've also got a situation where the government's paid an awful lot of attention to this and has done some pretty intensive reviewing. The ACCC did a very substantial
review, which Coles and Woolworths did not want to support,
look, I have
Margie.
to say,
why didn't Coles and Woolworths want to support grocery choice?
Listen, I tell you what, Coles and Woolworths...
Do you want to give consumers more information
Yeah,
on that,
happy
Margie?
to.
Well,
do you know how much...
Put on your own websites.
I'm very happy to. I think
Coles and Woolworths have their own websites, Margie.
Frank, I don't know about you, but every day when I open up the newspaper, there's loads of ads to tell me what's going on in my grocery stores. There's hundreds of thousands of catalogues, and we're in discussions with the government to do that.
So could I just ask them, why wouldn't Grocery Watch work?
It was unrealistic from moment one. Effectively, the kind of information that was being asked for just doesn't exist. It's not possible to give day-to-day, hour-by-hour prices in every store across the country. It's just not feasible or possible.
Would it help? We just saw the market breakdown there, and the criticism, not only from these gentlemen, but there's been a lot of criticism that this duopoly system is the one that in fact is holding prices up. Not that, and collusion is illegal, as we all know, But, of course, they're accused of not letting the smaller people in good sites.
It's always easy to attack big Australian companies. They're such a big target. They employ hundreds of thousands of Australians, and if it wasn't for Coles and Woolies, for example, there'd be virtually no jobs in regional communities. But put that to one side for a moment. And if we're going to talk figures, Frank,
and they're good at protecting themselves from competition, mate. They've got restrictive leases,
well, funnily enough, the ACCC said we have a workably competitive marketplace last year. And that would explain why there's 30,000 food retailers in this country. 30,000 food retailers in this country. Now, I don't know about you, Frank, but I get pretty tired of people thinking that Australian shoppers are stupid. They're not. They'll vote with their feet, and they'll shop where they choose to shop, and sometimes price. But sometimes price is not the reason.
Okay, your view, Craig?
Well, it's quite simple. The OECD figures tell the truth. For the last decade, people like Margie, with respect to her, have been saying the domination of Woolworths and Coles has been good, and that's put lower pressure on prices. But when we look at the figures, there's no lower pressure. In fact, our retail prices are increasing faster than anywhere else in the developed world.
As you see the duopoly system? So if we had more competition, that would be the key?
Absolutely correct.
So do you
We're in complete agreement. More competition is good.
But the restrictive leases, which we discussed last week, where are we up to on that?
Well, there's another 20% left. There's restricted covenants. There are land banks where Coles and Woolworths stop new entrants into the market. So Coles and Woolworths are very good at protecting themselves from competition.
How do you... Because, let's face it, Coles and Woolies, they've got the market share. They're not going to let anybody else, and that wouldn't even be smart business. So at what point will they...
The more competition, the better. And I have to say, in a marketplace where we've got 30,000 fresh food retailers in this country, we've got Aldi predicting they're going to grow to 700 stores, we've got Foodworks, we've got Costco now in Melbourne and opening soon in New South Wales. This doesn't say an uncompetitive marketplace to me. But having said that, there is significant review going on in the planning legislation across the country, and New South Wales is to the fore of that, and we're very happy to see that system opened up.
Are our wages bigger in this country than they are in New Zealand?
They're slightly larger, but that does not explain why we're paying 30% higher for prices for basic items like Vegemite between Australia and New Zealand.
Which are Australian products. Well, it certainly is a big issue, and I'm so pleased for our audience that we can try and analyse, you know, not that I'm sure we haven't achieved too much, but at least to have the open debate. Frank, thank you very much for coming along, and I love the way you did that story. It was a most interesting one. And Margie, as always, I knew you'd be able to put your best stiletto forward. Thank you very much.
I'll try.
We've got a lot more coming up on the program in about 15 minutes' time.